Some places aren't just wild, they're waiting. The advertisement had been a faded, stapled thing on a campus bulletin board, tacked up next to flyers for study groups and band auditions. Fire lookout, remote location, immersion in nature, good pay. For me, Kalen Vance, it wasn't just a job, it was an escape hatch. My life in the city, with its relentless concrete pulse and the echoing disappointments of a future I no longer recognized, felt stifling. I craved silence, distance, a place where the air was clean and the only demands were those of the wind and the trees. This isolated post, perched high above the vast, emerald carpet of the Redwood National Forest, seemed like a gift from a forgotten deity. I imagined weeks of quiet contemplation, the sun warming my face, the scent of pine a constant companion. Now, standing here only 3 days into my 3-month contract, the silence felt less like solace and more like a profound, unsettling absence. The drive had been a pilgrimage. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a rough dirt track that coiled like a sleeping serpent through ever-thickening stands of ancient redwoods. The trees here weren't just tall. They were colossal, primeval sentinels, their crowns lost in a perpetual twilight, their trunks wider than small cars. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but the sheer scale of it, the endless, unbroken canopy stretching to every horizon, began to feel less majestic and more like a suffocating embrace. There was no sign of human habitation once I passed the last logging road turnoff, just an infinite expanse of green, a verdant ocean swallowing the world whole. The air, crisp and tasting of damp earth and resin, filled my lungs, a rush of pure oxygen that brought with it a flicker of exhilaration. But beneath that, a nascent unease began to stir, a quiet hum like a distant, low-frequency tremor. This place was immense, untamed, and it felt, watchful. The path to the lookout tower wound steeply upwards, a narrow scar on the mountain's flank. At the top, silhouetted against the deepening afternoon sky, stood the tower, a slender, skeletal structure of dark wood and steel, its small cabin perched precariously at its peak like a bird's nest on a giant's shoulder. As I ascended, the forest floor beneath me grew more hushed, the rustling of leaves replaced by the subtle creak of the structure itself, settling in the gentle breeze. My new supervisor, Elias Thorne, was waiting for me on the small landing at the base of the cabin. He was a man carved from the very landscape, lean and wiry, with a face like a dried riverbed, etched with countless sunrises and harsh winters. His eyes, though, were what struck me, a startling, intense blue, almost unnervingly clear, that seemed to hold generations of quiet observation. "Kalen Vance," he rumbled, his voice gravelly but not unkind. He extended a hand that was surprisingly strong, his grip firm. "Thorne, welcome to the Eyrie." "The Eyrie," I echoed, trying to inject some lightness into my tone, though my heart was doing a rather frantic jig in my chest. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the surrounding forest. "Highest point for 50 miles, you'll see. Come on, let's get you acquainted." Thorne led me inside the compact cabin. It was utilitarian, built for function, not comfort, yet possessed a certain stoic charm. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, dominated by a small propane stove and a worn table bolted to the floor. "Water comes from the cistern up top," he explained, pointing to a small pump. "Composting toilet. No shower. Outhouse down below for bigger business. Keep it clean. Critters get curious." He gestured towards a bunk bed tucked into a corner, surprisingly cozy. "This is your roost. Best view is facing southeast. That's where most of the smoke starts stirring later in the season." After the indoor tour, we climbed the metal staircase, its open risers giving me a dizzying view of the ground far below. The air grew colder, thinner, and the wind, previously a whisper, now sang through the struts of the tower. When we reached the observation deck, my breath genuinely caught in my throat. Elias Thorne was right. The view was breathtaking. A vast, undulating tapestry of green stretched out in every direction, dotted with the occasional glint of a distant river. Clouds drifted beneath us like wandering sheep. I felt a fleeting sense of boundless freedom, a thrill that made the anxieties of the past days momentarily recede. Thorn pointed out landmarks, explaining the panoramic map affixed to a nearby stand, and demonstrated the powerful spotting scope and binoculars mounted on tripods. Your main job is vigilance, Kalen, eyes on the forest. If you see smoke, you radio it in. Fire, you hit the alarm, grab a shovel, and pray you're not too late. He paused, his blue eyes fixed on me. It's rarely that dramatic. Most days it's just you and the trees, but you gotta stay sharp and heed the rules. Rules? I asked, a slight frown creasing my brow. He nodded, his gaze distant as if looking through me to something beyond. Some unspoken, some just common sense. Don't fall asleep at the wheel. No open flames, but the most important ones, they're about the quiet. The things the quiet can do to a man up here. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Don't look outside after sunset unless you absolutely have to. If you hear steps on the stairs at night, don't move. Hide. If you see something at your window looking back at you from below, pretend you saw nothing. Don't be tempted by voices calling your name or cries for help. They aren't real, not in the way you think. His words, delivered with such a profound solemnity, sent a cold prickle up my spine. He didn't wink, didn't chuckle. There was no hint of a joke. He simply held my gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then straightened. You'll be fine, Kalen. Just remember what I said. He clapped me on the shoulder, a surprisingly gentle gesture from such a rugged man, then descended the metal stairs without another word. I watched him go, the rhythmic clanging of his boots fading as he reached the ground. Moments later, his battered pickup truck coughed to life, its engine a rough growl that quickly diminished into the vastness of the forest. Soon the only sound was the wind, sighing through the tower struts. I was alone, truly, profoundly alone. The exhilaration of the view had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating sense of isolation. Elias Thorne's rules echoed in my mind, each one a chilling whisper in the newly formed silence. Was this some bizarre hazing ritual? A test of my nerves? I tried to rationalize it away, chalk it up to Thorne's eccentricities, or the peculiar sense of humor common to those who spend too much time in solitude. But a tiny, insistent knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. My first hours alone were dedicated to settling in, a frantic need to impose order on this new, alien space. I unpacked my meager belongings, organized my food supplies, and then, with a nervous sigh, decided to clean. The previous lookout had kept the place tidy, but a fine layer of dust coated everything, a testament to its recent disuse. As I swept under the bunk bed, my broom snagged on something. I knelt, reaching into the gloom, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages brittle, unmarked by dates. The first few entries were mundane. Supply lists, radio codes, daily observations. But as I flipped further, the handwriting changed, became frantic, less legible, then changed again, belonging to someone else. It was a shared chronicle, a silent confession passed down through forgotten hands. And then I found it. A page different from the rest, scrawled in an almost illegible hand, faded ink bleeding slightly into the parchment. It was a list. Do not look outside after sunset. If you hear steps coming up the stairs at night, hide. If you see something outside your window looking back at you from below, pretend you didn't see anything. Do not be tempted by voices calling your name or cries for help. They are not real. Do not, under any circumstances, allow them inside. They listen. They mimic. They wait. The list ended abruptly, the last sentence trailing off, as if the writer had been interrupted or dragged away mid-thought. My laugh, when it came, was a brittle, dry sound, more a gasp of air than genuine amusement. It had to be a prank. Thorne, the journal, the rules, it was all part of the lookout's initiation, a twisted joke designed to fray the nerves of the new guy. Yet, as the last rays of sunlight began to bleed orange and bruised purple across the western horizon, painting the vast forest in deepening shadows, the uneasy feeling intensified. The laugh died in my throat. I busied myself with preparing a simple meal, the clang of pots and pans echoing unnaturally loud in the growing silence. The daylight was retreating, fast, like a tide pulling back from a perilous shore. Despite my attempts at rationalization, the words from the journal clung to my mind like burrs. Do not look outside after sunset. They aren't real. The simple sounds of the forest, which had initially been a comfort, began to shift. A rustle in the undergrowth seemed too deliberate, a twig snapping too sharp, too heavy. It wasn't the furtive scamper of a squirrel, nor the lumbering grace of a deer. It was something else. A slow, rhythmic cadence, like something heavy being dragged, or something large shifting its weight, just beyond the reach of my vision. The feeling of being watched became pervasive, a phantom weight on my shoulders. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a form, every tree a potential silhouette. The air grew heavy, pregnant with an unspoken presence. My gaze kept drifting to the windows, dark panes reflecting my own pale, anxious face. "Don't look," a voice inside my head screamed, echoing the journal's chilling directive. But another, primal part of me, drawn by a morbid curiosity, began to pull me towards the glass. Slowly, inexorably, my hand reached for the thin, blind cord. I don't know how long I stood there, hand hovering, breath hitched in my throat. Then I heard it clearly, a soft, deliberate tap against the glass. Not the wind, not a branch. A single, distinct tap coming from the window facing the sheer rock face below. My heart lurched, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. I ripped the blinds open, nothing. Only the endless, suffocating darkness, the impenetrable wall of trees. But then a flicker. A movement at the very edge of my peripheral vision, just beyond the light cast by my cabin lamp. Something tall, impossibly thin, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait like a broken puppet. It dissolved into the shadows as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the impression of something profoundly wrong. I stumbled back from the window, my legs suddenly weak, the blind snapping shut with a loud clatter that made me jump. My rational mind tried desperately to reassert itself, an animal, a trick of the light, fatigue playing games. But the cold, stark terror gripping me felt too real. That night, my dreams were a kaleidoscope of unsettling imagery. I saw shadows, impossibly elongated and skeletal, whispering to each other, their voices a discordant symphony of dry rustles and clicks. They moved with that same jerky, unnatural rhythm, their limbs twisting into impossible angles. Each time I blinked, they seemed to be closer, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I was running, always running, through a labyrinth of redwoods, my breath ragged, my legs leaden, the ground swallowing my every step. Sweat slicked my body, and I woke with a jolt, heart hammering, the pervasive silence of the forest pressing against the window panes. It took every ounce of my willpower to convince myself it was just a nightmare, the product of a vivid imagination and too much solitude. "It's just your imagination," I repeated like a desperate mantra, over and over, until the first tendrils of dawn began to touch the eastern sky. The arrival of morning was a blessed reprieve. The golden light, filtering through the dense canopy, seemed to banish the lingering specters of the night. The forest, bathed in sunlight, looked peaceful, almost serene, its darkness momentarily pushed back into the deepest recesses. I went through my routine. Coffee, a hurried breakfast, then the essential duties of the lookout. Checking equipment, recording weather data, scanning the horizon. The usual sounds of the forest birdsong, the distant buzz of insects were still absent, a subtle, disturbing detail I couldn't quite shake. Instead, there were soft, persistent whispers, carried on the wind. They were just at the edge of audibility, like a radio playing faintly in the distance, just out of tune. They seemed to swell and recede with the gusts of wind. An incessant, unsettling hum. I picked up the binoculars, my hands trembling slightly, and began to systematically sweep the horizon. Nothing, just an endless sea of green. No other human, no sign of life beyond the trees. It was odd. This time of year there should be hikers, even a stray vehicle, but there was nothing. A profound sense of isolation settled over me again, heavier this time. I lowered the binoculars, feeling foolish, then caught myself. The whispers seemed to intensify, weaving through the branches, closer now. They seemed to be speaking my name. Kalen, the urge to explore, to simply walk out into the vastness and see what lay beyond the immediate perimeter of the tower, grew almost unbearable. But the rules, Thorne's stern warning, the journal's cryptic entries, they held me captive. The forest was too vast, too unknown. I had no map, no compass, just a vague sense of direction. No, I had to stay put. I had to stay inside. As night descended again, the whispers grew bolder. They were no longer just carried on the wind. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of the tower, from the darkness outside the window, from beneath the floorboards. And then the distinct sound of footsteps. They weren't animal. They were heavy, deliberate, ascending the metal staircase. Clang, clang, clang. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, oppressive silence of the cabin. I remembered the rule. If you hear steps coming up the stairs at night, panic seized me. I scrambled, dropped to my hands and knees, fumbling in the dark beneath the bunk bed. The space was cramped, suffocating, the smell of dust and mildew heavy in the air. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then a soft click as if a latch was being tested. My breath hitched. Silence. Then they moved again, continuing up to the observation deck above. And then the voices. Soft at first, like the rustle of dry leaves, then growing clearer, each word piercing the quiet with terrifying precision. Kalen, oh Kalen. The voice was smooth, melodic, almost hypnotic. It wasn't Thorne's gruff voice, nor Silas's frantic one. It was something new, something insidious. Come out, wherever you are, don't be afraid, we just want to talk. We promise we won't hurt you. Another voice joined, higher-pitched, almost childish. We just want to play, Kalen, it's so lonely out here. Don't you want a friend? They went on, for what felt like an eternity but could have only been minutes. They spoke of things they shouldn't know. My city life, the disappointments, the loneliness that had driven me here. They offered solutions, tempting promises of belonging, of never being alone again. Each word was a hook, pulling at my deepest desires and fears. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, cold sweat slicking my skin. I pressed my face into the musty blankets, willing myself to disappear, to become invisible. Finally, mercifully, the voices faded, their footsteps receding down the stairs, leaving behind only the profound, suffocating silence. I stayed under that bed for another hour, long after the last echo of their presence had vanished, my muscles aching, my mind replaying every terrifying word. The adrenaline coursed through me, leaving me shaky and nauseous. When I finally crawled out, my limbs felt like lead, my knees screaming in protest. Sleep was a distant fantasy. The image of those figures, their voices echoing in the confined space, burned into my mind. They knew me. They knew my name. Dawn arrived, a pale, hesitant thing, but I greeted it with a desperate gratitude. I went through the motions of my morning routine, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. My satellite check-in with Thorne was brief, his voice distant and clipped. I couldn't bring myself to mention the night's events, the terror still too raw, too unbelievable. He'd probably think I was losing my mind, just as he hinted others had. The day dragged. I tried to immerse myself in a book, anything to distract myself from the lingering dread, but the words swam before my eyes. The whispers persisted, more insistent in the daylight, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of the forest. And then I heard it. A distinct thunk, thunk, thunk against the lower part of the tower. Not rocks, something else. Something deliberate, rhythmic. I looked out the window, dread coiling in my gut, and there she was, standing at the base of the tower, looking up at me. A woman. Long, dark hair, tangled with leaves and twigs, bright, unsettlingly blue eyes. She waved, a wide, open gesture, a strange, knowing smile on her face. Her clothes were a tattered collection of mismatched fabrics, blending almost seamlessly with the forest floor. Hello up there. Her voice carried clearly, too clearly on the wind. Can you let me in? It's getting dark and I'm quite lost. Getting dark. The sun was still high, bathing the forest in a golden glow. A fresh wave of unease washed over me, but she was a person, a human being, and I was desperate for human contact. Against the chilling warnings of the journal and Thorne's rules, a desperate hope for normalcy, for a shared reality, nudged me towards the door. Hesitantly, I unlatched it. She stepped inside, shaking off imaginary water from her tattered jacket. "Thank you so much. I've been hiking for days, completely lost track of time." Her eyes, those unsettlingly blue eyes, darted around the small cabin, lingering on the journal I had hastily shoved under the bed. "I'm Kaelin," I said, my voice hoarse. Are you all right? You look like you've been through a lot." "Elara," she replied, a strange, almost too wide smile stretching her lips. "And I'm perfectly fine, just a little weary. You've got a cozy spot here, Kaelin. So peaceful, so alone." The last words seemed to hang in the air, weighted with an unspoken meaning. I was grateful for the company, despite the unsettling strangeness of her arrival, her unblinking gaze. Perhaps she could explain the whispers, the footsteps, the shadows. Maybe she was simply a very eccentric hiker, and I was just overly paranoid from isolation. She didn't seem to mind the cramped space, unrolling a sleeping bag on the floor as night began its slow, inevitable descent. "I don't mind the floor," she said, her voice light, dismissive. "I'm used to roughing it." The sky outside the lookout tower was clear, awash with a million twinkling stars, but the peace was an illusion. The wind began to howl, a mournful rising keen that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the tower. I lay on my cot, muscles tense, every nerve on edge. Elara, however, seemed to drift off instantly, her breathing slow and even. I envied her apparent calm, her easy slumber. Then, a sudden, deafening crack split the night, a clap of thunder that shook the entire tower, rattling the windows in their frames. My heart leaped into my throat. "It's just a storm," I whispered to myself, remembering Thorne's mantra, "just an animal." But then Elara cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the thunder. "Kaelin, Kaelin, look." My eyes snapped open. Another flash of lightning illuminated the forest, brief but blinding, revealing a monstrous silhouette pressed against the window facing the rocky ledge below. My blood ran cold. It was tall, impossibly slender, its head tilted, and those glowing, empty eyes were fixed directly on us. What is it?" I choked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know," Elara stammered, her eyes wide, "but it's still there, just outside." As if to confirm her words, a long, bony finger tapped against the glass, the sound sickeningly deliberate, almost playful. It was too long, too thin, not human. My fear became a raging inferno. I grabbed Elara's arm, pulling her away from the window with a desperate strength I didn't know I possessed, dragging her towards the center of the room, away from the glass. "We have to stay away from the windows," I hissed, the words from the journal, Thorne's warnings, screaming in my head. "That's one of the rules," she nodded, her face pale, eyes wide with a fear that suddenly felt very real, very human. But the shift in her expression, the sudden, sharp fear, was unsettling. All this time she had seemed so unbothered by the strangeness. "Why now? What do we do?" she whispered, clutching my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We stay calm," I said, trying to project an authority I didn't feel. "We stay quiet. Whatever they are, they want us to panic. We follow the procedure." "Procedure?" Voices down, I whispered, barely audible over the rising gale outside. "And we stay here away from the glass. We don't acknowledge them. Not a sound." We huddled together on the floor, backs to the wall, facing away from the windows, pretending they weren't there, pretending the things outside weren't real, weren't watching us. But the tapping continued, sporadic, chillingly patient. Sometimes it was soft, a gentle caress against the glass. Other times it was hard, insistent, like a frustrated fist trying to shatter the barrier. The wind howled, a symphony of torment. The whispers returned, louder, more numerous, weaving in and out of the storm's fury. They were calling my name, Kaelin, Kaelin, over and over, sometimes soft, sometimes piercing. And sometimes they sounded like Elara, whimpering my name, pleading with me to open the door to make it stop. But Alara was right beside me, silent, trembling. It was a cruel, insidious mimicry the night stretched into an eternity of terror. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. Every creak of the tower, every gust of wind, every phantom whisper sent jolts of pure fear through us. When the first hint of false dawn painted the sky a bruised gray, Alara finally stirred. I can't stay here, she rasped, her voice raw. I have to go. I can't, not another night. I wanted to tell her to stay, to beg her to endure it with me, but a deeper, more chilling part of me knew she had to leave. Her presence, instead of providing comfort, had seemed to amplify the horror. Maybe she was drawing them in, a beacon in the night. Or maybe she was part of it. I dismissed the thought immediately. It was the lack of sleep, the terror. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. She left after a silent breakfast, slipping away into the pale, uncertain light of dawn, a phone number scrawled on a scrap of paper, her only trace. I watched her go, a strange mix of relief and a renewed, profound loneliness washing over me. The day passed in a surreal haze. The quiet of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was a hungry, waiting silence. The whispers persisted, faint but constant, a maddening, low hum that felt like it was inside my own skull. I tried to focus on my duties, but my gaze kept drifting to the windows, expecting to see a shadow, a twisted limb, a pair of glowing eyes. Nothing, and that nothing was worse. The absence of a visible threat only deepened the paranoia. My mind was playing tricks on me, Elias Thorne had said. But what if it wasn't? What if it was real? As the sun began its inevitable descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, I felt a resurgence of panic. Another night. Alone. The journal's words haunted me. Do not look outside after sunset. Curiosity, a dangerous, insidious thing, had led me to open the blinds the first night. And then the tapping, the faces. This time I resolved I would keep the blinds shut. I would barricade the door. I would simply endure. But the night had other plans. The moment true darkness fell, the sounds began. Not just the whispers, but a cacophony of scratching, scraping, heavy thumps against the outside walls of the cabin. It sounded like something was dragging its immense weight against the wood, trying to dislodge the planks, trying to peel the tower open. The windows, despite the drawn blinds, seemed to pulse with a malevolent, unseen light. Then came the banging. Not tapping, but violent, percussive blows, as if something gargantuan was striking the tower with a blunt instrument. Thud, crack, thud. The sounds were terrifyingly close, reverberating through the thin walls, making the very floorboards vibrate. I crawled under the bed again, trembling, my hands clamped over my ears, trying to block out the assault. The sounds grew louder, more frantic. I heard splintering wood, the sickening shriek of tortured metal. A window above me must have shattered, because suddenly the wind was roaring through the tower, bringing with it a chilling dampness and the faint, acrid smell of ozone and something else. Something primal and cold, like wet earth and ancient dread. Then, through the cacophony, a voice. Soft, insidious, impossibly close. It wasn't the mimicry from the night before. This was different. It sounded like a voice from a dream, a forgotten memory. "Let me in," it whispered, directly into my ear, as if a mouth was pressed against my temple. "I can help you. I know what's going on out there. Let me in and we'll talk. There's a way out of this for you, Kalen, but only if you let me in." The voice shifted, became Elias Thorne's gravelly tone, full of weary knowledge. "They're coming for us, Kalen. Please open the door. I can protect you. We can face them together." Then it changed again, becoming Alara's frantic whisper. "Please open the door, Kalen. They're coming for us. I can't hold them off much longer." It was a cruel, desperate torment. My mind screamed at me, reminding me of the journal, of Thorne's true warning. They are not real. But the offer, the promise of safety, of answers, was a siren song, impossibly tempting in the absolute terror of the moment. My body was shaking so violently I thought my bones would shatter. My resolve, already frayed, began to unravel. The sounds of destruction outside intensified, closer, more immediate. The walls groaned. It felt like the tower itself was about to collapse, and then a new whisper, chillingly calm, spoke, a voice that was undeniably my own. "There's a way out of this, Kalen. Let me in. Let us in. We are already inside, Kalen. Just open the door. We'll show you." Dawn was a faint glimmer on the horizon, a promise of light that seemed impossibly distant. The banging outside was relentless, a drumming against the very foundation of my sanity. My trembling hands, guided by an unseen force, or perhaps by the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the moment, reached for the bolt. Hope and horror battled in my chest. A way out. A way to make it stop. With a soft click, the bolt retracted. I opened the door. The chill that swept into the tower was profound, a raw, ancient cold that settled deep into my bones. The forest, bathed in the pale, nascent light of morning, was unnervingly silent. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no distant hum of insects. It was a preternatural stillness, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The air itself felt thick, charged with an unidentifiable energy. My gaze swept the perimeter of the tower, expecting to see the twisted forms, the glowing eyes, but there was nothing. Only the colossal, silent trees standing sentinel, their shadows long and impossibly dark in the low light. But I felt them, a pervasive, prickling sensation on my skin, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, from every shadow, from every crevice in the bark of the ancient trees. Unseen eyes, countless, ancient, fixed upon me. The game I had imagined, the adventure of being a fire lookout, felt like a naive fantasy from another lifetime. This was no game. With a final, desperate look at the tower, its shattered window, its splintered doorframe, its silent, accusing presence, I braced myself and stepped out. I needed to get away. To the nearest town, to people, to a place where the air didn't hum with unseen entities. It was 6, maybe 7 miles, a full day's walk the old dirt road, barely more than a deer trail, wound through the dense woods. The fresh air, though cold, filled my lungs, and for a fleeting moment I felt a desperate surge of determination. I could do this. I could outrun it. I hadn't been walking for more than 20 minutes when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the thick undergrowth beside the road. Then, a pair of eyes, luminous and green, staring back at me from the depths of the shadows. My heart seized. It was a deer. Or it looked like one at first. As it stepped into the faint light, I saw the truth. Its face was grotesquely wrong, twisted into a parody of its natural form, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, sickly green luminescence. Its limbs were too long, too spindly, its body too gaunt. It walked towards me, slowly, deliberately, its hooves clicking softly on the hard-packed earth. My hand instinctively went to the hunting knife I kept in my pocket, but I froze. The creature didn't attack. It simply stopped a few feet from me, staring, those horrifyingly glowing eyes fixed on mine. They were hypnotic, drawing me in, pulling me into a vast, cold emptiness. I felt my own breath catch, my muscles lock. My vision blurred. A strange sensation washed over me, a chilling cold that seemed to seep into my very bones, and then darkness. When I awoke, the sun was high overhead, a harsh glare filtering through the dense canopy. The deformed deer was gone. There were no tracks, no sign it had ever been there, just the faint imprint of my own body on the damp earth. My head throbbed. A dull, insistent pain and a strange lethargy weighed down my limbs. Shaking off the lingering confusion, I pushed myself to my feet and continued walking, determined to reach town. The forest seemed different now. The rustling of leaves, the creaking of ancient trees, they were amplified, echoing through the oppressive silence. There were no birds, no squirrels, no insects. It was a dead quiet, filled only with the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thud of my boots on the earth. The feeling of being watched was constant, a cold pressure on the back of my neck. Every few minutes, I'd catch a fleeting glimpse of movement in my periphery, shadows darting between the colossal trunks, just out of sight. They vanished the moment I turned my head, but the sensation of their presence, their patient trailing, was undeniable. My anxiety spiraled, transforming into a desperate, frantic need to escape just as my legs threatened to buckle. When exhaustion and dehydration had brought me to the brink, I saw it. The break in the tree line, the faint, shimmering haze of distant civilization. With a surge of relief, I stumbled out of the forest and into the small, unassuming town. I found Elias Thorne at the general store, haggling with a gruff-looking shopkeeper over a sack of feed. He looked up as I entered, his clear blue eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Kalen," he said, his voice laced with an unexpected note of caution. "What in blazes are you doing here? Your shift isn't up for another week." "I couldn't stay," I rasped, my voice raw, the words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. "Something's up there, Thorne, something not right. The whispers, the footsteps, the faces at the window. I had a visitor, Alara, and then the noises, the banging, the voices. It was trying to get in, Thorne. It shattered a window." He looked at me, his weathered face impassive, his blue eyes unblinking. He didn't laugh, he didn't even flinch. He just listened patiently, intently as I spilled every terrifying detail. When I finished, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "Not serious," he finally said, his voice flat. "I wish I wasn't," I exploded, frustrated by his calm. "I wish it was a joke, a prank. But it's real, Thorne, it's absolutely real," he sighed, a long, weary sound, and ran a hand over his rough beard. "No, Kalen," he said, his gaze fixed on something beyond me. "It's not normal. But you're not the first, and you won't be the last." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean there have been others," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "Lookouts, over the years. Some come down early like you. Others, they just stop checking in. We send a crew up, find the tower empty. No sign of struggle, nothing. Then sometimes days later, weeks, they reappear, miles away, disoriented. Some never reappear at all." My throat tightened, a cold knot of fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a desperate anger. He met my gaze, his eyes holding an ancient, unreadable sadness. "Because if I did, Kalen, would you have taken the job?" I swallowed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "No," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Probably not." "Exactly," he said, a grin set to his lips. "Nobody would. The forest, it has its own ways. Some call it cabin fever, the loneliness getting to a man. Others, they think something else is out there, something ancient, something that doesn't like to be watched." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the distant tree line. "And some folks, Kalen, they come back different. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling pronouncement. I left Elias Thorne and the town, the unsettling knowledge he had imparted settling over me like a shroud. I tried to slip back into a normal routine in the city, but the attempt was futile. The forest had left an indelible mark, a psychic scar. Every time I closed my eyes, the twisted forms, the glowing eyes, the shattered window, replayed themselves with sickening clarity. The whispers, too, had followed me. They weren't just in my mind. They were around me, just at the edge of hearing, weaving through the urban clamor. Sometimes they were faint, like a distant hum, a low, incessant murmur beneath the surface of the city's noise. Other times, late at night, in the quiet of my apartment, they would swell, impossibly loud, until it felt as if a chorus of unseen entities was pressed against my ear, whispering secrets I couldn't quite decipher. Promises I didn't want to hear. The city, once a comforting cacophony, now felt alien. The crowds a flimsy shield against the encroaching darkness. I found myself scanning faces in the subway, wondering if others could see the shadows I now perceived, the subtle distortions at the edges of ordinary vision. The familiar world felt warped, stretched, as if a thin veil had been drawn back, revealing a terrifying truth beneath. I went to stay with my family, hoping the familiar comfort of their presence would dispel the lingering horror. They saw the change in me, the quiet withdrawal, the haunted look in my eyes. They asked if I was all right, if the job had been too much. I told them I was fine, that it was just the adjustment, the isolation. How could I explain? How could I tell them about the things that whispered, the things that tried to get in, the ancient hunger in the woods? They were just relieved to have me home, safe. Or so they thought. The whispers followed me there too, even into the woods behind their house, a place that had always been a sanctuary, a haven of peace. Now it felt like a trap. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches, carried the insidious echoes of the tower. I saw them there too, the fleeting peripheral movements, the impossibly thin shadows that dissolved the moment I tried to look directly at them. One night, lying awake, staring out at the sprawling, indifferent lights of Vancouver, the unanswered questions gnawed at me. What had I truly encountered? What had happened in that tower? The only thing that was clear is that I was profoundly, irrevocably changed. I still felt a cold, deep emptiness inside me, an echo of the void I had glimpsed in the forest. I looked into the mirror above my dresser. My face was pale, my eyes wide, haunted. But it wasn't just my eyes staring back. It was their asterisk eyes. The same glowing, empty eyes of the twisted deer, the same unblinking, ancient gaze I had glimpsed in the darkness. A part of me, a new, cold, insidious part, felt a strange, compelling pull to go back. Not for answers, not for proof, but to feel that presence again, to return to the source of this chilling transformation. But another part, a smaller, desperate fragment of the Kalen Vance I once was, knew better. It knew that whatever they weren't something that could be reasoned with, explained away. I shook my head, a futile attempt to dislodge the thoughts, the whispers, the creeping dread. They were always there now, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. After a long, silent moment, I reached out and slowly, deliberately closed the blinds. Sleep didn't come. It never truly did, not anymore. What was the most unsettling part of Kalen's encounter? Share your thoughts below and follow for more chilling tales.